So that's my spiel. And to give you a larger picture of our tourism world is someone that I've become recently well acquainted with. He's always somebody I've admired. I've seen him speak several times, and he's a good friend of our very own Carl Rabata, wherever he went to. And we are now part of M-Trip, which is a reporting system that we hope that will become tools for our community, and we have many lodging properties that are signing up to participate. If you want more information about that, we'll be able to tell you about that later. But Mr. Ralf Garrison is our next speaker. He's incredibly entertaining and very, very educational, and I hope you're going to be taking notes. He is the owner of the advisory group, and he's the director of M-Trip, which I just referred to, which is a reporting system that we're now utilizing. And he also is the founder of Mountain Travel Symposium, and I think some of you attended that fabulous 4 days of education and networking in North Shore last week. So Ralph, I'd love to introduce you as our next speaker, and you can take it from here. And like I said, you better take notes, and he moves pretty fast, so I wouldn't blink.
Thanks very much, Carol. Pleased to be here in Lake Tahoe, and I want to tell you with my perspective on the industry over some 30 years and this last winter season, I think you're onto something by having your annual tourism meeting at an improv theater. Well, it's really maybe one of the most entertaining ways to look at what's going on in the marketplace, and frankly, the need to react to market conditions are probably analogous to some of the same skill sets that people deploy in improv. And the first time it came up is when we were trying to get our enabling technology to work here just a few moments ago. That would have added another measure of improv, I'll tell you, for me to offer you what is going to end up being sort of death by PowerPoint here over these next 45 minutes as I try to set the context for what's going on in the marketplace as best I'm able with two families of data that I'll be talking about over the next little while. So with that, and some 45 odd minutes available, the advisory group is a strategic marketing company that's a little unique because we're marketing guys that deal on the supply side. Most marketing guys, gals, deal on the demand side. All my metaphors, demand comes down from the top, supply comes up from the bottom, and actually happens in the middle. But my job, as I have defined it, is to understand the pieces of a vacation that represent the supply of a vacation when put together and bundled from the perspective of the consumer vis-a-vis the competition, and how you, the suppliers of the vacation, work together to provide your product, bundle it, package it, send it through the distribution channels so that you have a competitive advantage in the marketplace is my supply side focus. There's a lot to that, but I work sort of like a destination travel association. We're there one in North America, and the things that Carol has talked about, M-Trip, the Mountain Travel Research Program, the Mountain Travel Symposium, the Central Reservations Association, are all brands or pieces, really, of this sort of destination mountain travel. My primary source of information today will be M-Trip, and the M-Trip system includes two things. I'll try to just briefly tell you what that context is. Starting at the bottom, we gather all the market data that we can. Broad-based economic data that we think is of interest to you suppliers or is indicative of what our consumers will be doing, thinking about when they make their vacations. We aggregate all daily travel news that we can and pump it out to our subscribers. We bundle it up in a monthly newsletter. We spend a lot of time thinking and looking at that and putting a briefing together. And I then make presentations, not unlike the one that I'm doing today, for our subscribers by way of quarterly presentations, usually by way of a website. We put that all together in a Mountain Intelligence pack, and that pack is available to our subscribers, to you through your affiliation with the Chamber. I'll tell you more about that, but it's the source of the first part of my presentation this afternoon. Sorry about that. So that's what it looks like, the sort of context for the content, if you will. The second part is primary data that we collect from lodging properties, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a moment's time. In the interest of time, I'm not going to go through the market intelligence pack, but I will use that data to talk to you about sort of the economic forces that are going on out there, a little bit about weather. There are two wild cards that affect the leisure travel industry. Stealing my own thunder from a little later on, but those wild cards are always part of a leisure travel game plan. It is the economy, or more specifically, how consumers feel about spending their discretionary dollars based on the economy. And it's the weather. And weather's not just snow, but in our industry, I think you have to read S-N-O-W when I say weather. Those two wild cards oscillate, and that's where the improv part comes as the part of a situation assessment really is those things that are out there in the marketplace that affect one's ability to do business, but over which they have no control. If I had a lot of time, I'd go back to my sailing background and the sailing metaphor, because that works pretty well as well, but I think you get it. So first section is that in red. We'll talk specifically about destination lodging. It's M-Trip's business, and it's the best indicator that we can find to really put our finger on the pulse of the destination part of the industry. The guests that come from furthest, that stay the longest, that leaves most of the money behind in a resort community are best gauged by the destination guest. In most of our mountain resort communities, real estate and destination tourism were the two pistons of the engine. For the moment, we'll leave real estate aside and put our eggs in the basket of destination tourism, and I intend to show you why that continues to be a good bet, as I'm sure your own thoughts will coincide. A few observations, not just the data, but what I think it means and how I think it spins to you, and then maybe just a little recap about the Mountain Travel Symposium and what we've learned from that with the benefit of those of you around here. So without further ado, off we go in the drill. Economic forces are the first part of the market update, and I'm going to use three indicators that I'll put all together and then try to explain a little more as time goes on. So these are jobs, the consumer confidence, and the Dow Jones as an indicator. So with all of those three together, let me take one out and show you what is an inverse correlation if we use sort of statistical terms. This is jobs, or the unemployment rate. As the unemployment rate goes down, that's a good thing. We'd like to see it going down. It is going down, not as fast as we'd like, but that's the first indicator. This is consumer confidence over these past several years, much more sporadic as it reacts to jobs that move much more slowly and sedentarily. But as jobs go down, confidence goes up, and that's what we're seeing occur, and that's a good thing too. Leisure travel vacations are based on extra time and extra money is best gauged by how our consumers feels about the confidence they have in the industry. These are Conference Board numbers, 60% based on consumers feeling about the future, 40% based on their current thoughts. And I'll give you a little bit more information on this indicator as we go on. So that's one correlation. The second correlation is the Dow against consumer confidence. That's a direct correlation, and you can see it's very linear. As a matter of fact, it follows almost exactly. Interestingly enough, the Dow and other market indicators are really speculative in their own right, but it's how the business community feels about the future, as opposed to how the consumers feel about the future. You'll also notice that the difference, the deviation between the left and the right is growing consistently wider as time goes on. If I were to take us back a year or two, you would see them going along almost in parallel from 2004 to about 2006. Right? The difference between those indicators is sort of a gap based on perception versus reality. The challenge in this case is we don't know which one's which, right? Are the consumers the reality and the Dow is the perception that goes from it as they buy and sell and determine how stock goes? Or is the converse true? Does the Dow set the pace and consumers react accordingly? Inquiring minds want to know. I certainly don't. Right, so let's take another look at consumer confidence, and now over a longer term. We were just looking at this area. So this is a 2-year view where the confidence index is about 70 and has been for the last year. Were I to have been here a year ago, it was just a little bit off, but you see that it has gone down and come back up in this confidence index. It was just released in the last day or two, excuse me, and continues to be on just about that level, dropped about 1 point. So that's a confidence index, but if I take that index and show it to you over a 5-year period, it was up in the 110 and 20 arena. A couple of years before that, 140 and 50. It started out at 100 in 1985. So you can see it dropped all the way down to 25, a very sporadic move for the last little while, and now about 70. Here's what the Conference Board says. An indicator below 50 is a depression. People should not be expected or anticipated to spend any discretionary dollars under any circumstances. Above 90 is when there's enough extra money in the marketplace that demand is generated by the market conditions for discretionary spending, right? Put leisure travel in the discretionary spending category, and we can expect some help from the market if the consumer confidence index is up here. Well, you can also see that that isn't in evidence over the last couple of years, and there's nothing that we can see on the horizon, nor can anyone else, that allows me to tell you that you should count on any help from the marketplace for the time being. So the conclusion here is demand is not going to come from the marketplace for the next foreseeable future. You aren't going to get the kind of help that we would like to be able to offer you from market conditions making the consumer feel comfortable about spending. You're going to have to earn it. A lot of ways to earn it. We'll talk more about that in a little bit, but that's sort of the message. Let's go now from the economy to the weather in this sort of abbreviated version. MTrip, by the way, tracks 15 indicators and puts those out on a monthly basis. These are the two that I've chosen to best demonstrate the situation. So weather is not just snow, and I'll try to explain why. But let's take a look at the middle of January 2011 versus the middle of January 2012, according to NOAA. And if you look at most of the country, you see a fairly significant difference. The predominant shift that is largely the same is in the Pacific Northwest, where it was wet and cold, both in 2011 and 2012. Some help in the Rockies, as you know, depending upon the time, either hot or dry, or a combination of both through the Midwest and through the East. So when you get some anecdotal quotes, it's sort of slow start and quick ending, but President's Weekend was good. Dry very early, warm very late, deep fried, if you will. And it's not just the reality of the weather, it's the perception. You know, what's often called backyard snow. A consumer in St. Louis feels like if there's snow in their backyard, there has to be snow in the mountains where they would normally go, and the converse would also be true. So more than almost anything, the reality of snow is one thing, natural snow versus man-made snow, but it's also the perception in the mind of the consumer. And a lot of that comes from previous years, and the last couple of years were really good natural snow throughout most of the country. So we had positive equity going into this year that helped advance reservations, help guests be confident about making their vacation plans, sending their money ahead and the like. And if there was positive equity going into this year, the rhetorical question is, what about next year? We can only imagine. So, last 2 good years make a difference. In-state local business was more discretionary. They had discretion, so they used it if snow wasn't to their liking. More regionally and more nationally, the further a person came, the more they booked in advance, the more they were locked in, the more they chose to come. So contrary to the last couple of years where the local and regional business sustained this best, in this most recent year the converse was true. A little bit more about that a little bit later on. So you can see a couple of other little anecdotal questions about the hangover and so forth and so on. I did an Eastern Midwest Rockies version. East went from, that isn't supposed to be Katrina, is it? Got the wrong one going there on my slide. But Mother Nature wasn't very nice. However, snowmaking prevailed and the East did relatively well. In the Rockies, the Middle Rockies did okay. North Rockies a little better. South Rockies a little better. But it was that destination guest that sustained the Rockies in Colorado and Utah for the best part. Far West, I don't have to tell you the story. Really dry up until just really the last, 4 to 6 weeks ago. And then a recovery, was it in time? Probably not enough to recover entirely, but it'll help moisture and it'll help that equity in the mind of the consumer in any event. We'll see how long we can ride that pony. Here's the most fun one from the Pacific Northwest. After 3 years in a row, a great year, and some people looking for the face shots found themselves traveling to the Pacific Northwest when they otherwise wouldn't have had to. Canada generally followed the U.S., but with a little stronger indication as they were further up north in the process. So if I take a look at what happens as a result of snow and use lift ticket sales, that's one kind of indicator. If I use the lodging numbers that come from destination tourism, that's an entirely different kind of indicator. And it's almost a tale of two seasons, because the lift ticket side of things really looks quite dire, while the destination travel side of things I intend to show you not so bad. But here's how National Ski Area Association takes a look at lift tickets since, 1985 or so. And you can see that there are some times when we really dropped down very low. The drum roll has to be abbreviated because they haven't gathered and presented their numbers, nor will they give us a number until next week when NSAA meets. But the general indications are that, contrary to the 60 million record over the last couple of years, that we're going to be somewhere around 50, 51, 52, which would be 12 to 15% down from last year's record based on lift tickets. Big rhetorical discussion about whether snow trumps the economy or vice versa. But with good snow and a tough economy, you can see that lift ticket sales have done really quite well. When the converse is true, not so much. Not so much. So we'll see how that goes, but I'm going to say 52 million for purposes of argument in today's discussion, and then we'll move to really taking a look at the lodging part once I try to build a case for what I think is an anomaly that falls outside the statistical parameters that I can use to give you some sense about whether weather is going to affect us in the future like it has in the past. Here's the argument. We had, as a nation, just about the driest period, 6-month period that we've ever had, certainly in recent memory. That started at the start of the season, but at the same time and at the end of the season, we had the warmest March on record, the warmest January through March in some 50-odd years. So those two together have not conspired in the same way in recent memory. I went back to 1984 and looked over lift tickets on top of those, couldn't find the same corollary. But it wasn't just that, it was that it happened in almost all of the regions of the United States. Only the Pacific Northwest was saved. And one other data point, just to let you know, and that is when we've had marginal weather, it has been against a previous year of marginal weather. So our consumers' expectations weren't quite so high. But this year, we had really spoiled our skiers over a couple of years of really great weather. And they learned to be really kind of snow snobs when it came to having an expectation that was really tough to meet with a man-made product. And so we were more reliant on the natural product as a result. So I suggest that that combination of precipitation, temperature, timing, and great expectations is not likely to occur again. We can't find it in the past. I hope that I'm not here reporting that we'll find it again in the future. And I suggest that it's an anomaly, sort of like the black swan, a 1 in 100 scenario. And my hope is that you find that experience to be true, but my greater hope is that consumers just erase this year from their thinking that it was an anomaly and that they can go back to their normal patterns. Ian Arthur at the Mountain Travel Symposium, he's Chief Marketing Officer for Interwest, he said, skiing's just a lot like baseball. I'm from Denver and we have to kind of just get a lobotomy every year. Hope springs eternal when you go on to the next year, and hopefully our skiers will think the same thing as well. Right? It's something that we love, it's the American sport, and we're back at it next year with the same passion, hoping for the best, and we'll leave it at that. So let me take a look at lodging and keep myself moving right along. I'm first going to give you a 5-year view of lodging, and this is based on all of M-Trip's reporting destinations. There are 35 destinations, the newest and most recent of which is Tahoe South. I think I've got that right. I'm going to have to train myself as being an old dog in that process. But Tahoe South, having reported some a few years ago, is now back on our radar screen with a number of lodging properties reporting the same metrics that I've got, with 18 other western destinations and 12 other eastern destinations that make the data set from which I'm speaking. So over the last 5 years, Tahoe South is not in these numbers, having just come back in, but you can see that occupancy has moved downward and then tried to come back up until this most recent winter season. These numbers are actuals, November through March, plus reservations on the books for April as of March 31st. So it's a pretty good indication of the whole season. It'll move very little as we go on through the season. So an attempt to come back in occupancy was thwarted, rate dropped, and came back up, and in this most recent year, as you'll see, rate continued to go up. It wasn't about the price that we paid this last winter season. It was about the product that we provided. Not the case over the last couple of years. People paid what they needed to for the product that they wanted most. The converse was true when the economy was a wild card was driving the previous couple of years. Right. So this is the last winter season according to M-Trip, and this is the destination side of the business, remembering that the lift ticket side is down 12 to 15%. And we found overall occupancy is down just a little over 2% across the M-Trip universe. Really not bad if you think about all what transpired. A relatively resilient guest, that destination guest, had booked many of them in advance before snow became an issue. And as I'll show you in a moment, early season momentum was very strong. This is a season that almost was I say this so many often, if it was only for a normal year, rate in fact went up as the season progressed, and the combination of overall revenue, the lodging term is RevPAR because they divide it by the number of rooms. But for the overall community, the number of guests, the revenue that came from those guests, the folks here with the charge card to be able to spend money ended up being up 2% in the M-Trip universe. So a really much better solution than you might have otherwise imagined has come out of this winter season when you look at the M-Trip universe of destination resorts. Here's how it came to pass. These are reservations on the books as the season transpired. That's occupancy. We went into the season up 10 to 12%, and then as the season unfolded, lost momentum. By the time we got to February and March, the momentum had been lost largely. That's not so true in your region, right? Because of the way your snow pattern came, you had a bump on the tail end, but in the overall universe, this is the momentum that dropped right through the tail end of the season when we really just melted off. This is how rate went at the same time. Rate increased as occupancy decreased. Those of you who follow price elasticity would expect that to happen, and it did. Multiply it together in overall revenues, and that's how you end up. So get the rest of the junk out of there, and there's the overall revenue pattern for the winter season that best reflects the destination traveler as they made their decisions starting in October, then November, December, and so forth and so on. What might have happened had the weather cooperated? Yeah, well, improv. But while that was the general comment, this is the individual performance of the destinations within that set. This variance between the winners and the losers, plus 30 to negative 30 in occupancy, plus 30 to negative 9 in rate, is twice as great as it was last year. Last year was twice as great as it was the year before. The year before was nearly twice as great as it was the year before that. So since the wheels began to fall off the economy in 2008, the difference between the winners and the losers has almost doubled each of the last couple of years. Darwin is not playing fair in how the economy and the market are affecting our ability to do business. Or some destinations are managing to improv better than others as they react to the circumstances in the marketplace. It would be very valuable for you to ponder the answer to those questions and how it affects your individual business and your destination. Because the secret to what you do in the future could very well be based on what's working or what's not working. What are the common characteristics of the winners versus the losers? I'd like to tell you the person that got 30% in occupancy also got 30% in rate, but you probably know that's not likely to be true. If you paired them together, this is more likely what happened, right? Occupancy went at the expense of rate or the converse, so it takes a lot more assessment than I would be able to offer you in today's setting to be able to really correlate which one of those combinations might work best based on what it takes to be a carrot to dangle your guest across the economic and weather considerations to cause them to participate in sport. So let me give you my observations overall. I've already sort of set the stage for the wild cards flipping between the economy and the weather. 2 years of economic uncertainty and snow certainty flipped in the process. The weather became really strategic, the perception of the weather versus the reality of the weather, as people found no good snow at destination resorts anywhere in January. It's very interesting to see how they booked, because they booked on their perception of the destinations that usually have the best snow, right? Absent any fact to the contrary, it was snow equity in the mind of the consumers who chose the destinations that they thought would most likely have snow in that January-February process. And then snow came back into the picture for those of you in the West, and so did the reality of those scenarios. So the question that this snow anomaly is going to have equity in the future or not really remains to be seen. We try to correlate the relationship between skier visits, that is lift ticket sales, and snowfall. You would think it would be a direct correlation. It's absolutely intuitive, but as you see, not so much. The truth is that for much of the country and for most of our guests, man-made snow does the job. And we have about 75% of the resorts in the United States providing an adequate, based on the guests, coverage of man-made snow. So the relationship between natural snow and skier visits is not a direct correlation. It's not as easy to connect the dots as you might first think. And when we try to do the other thing, the correlation between snow and destination guests, you can see that there also is an ambiguous correlation at best. Destinations guests tend to book before snow is a consideration, in most cases. You may argue that your San Francisco guest waits until Wednesday and then pulls the trigger based on their perception of snow or the reality thereof. But the more classic destination guest is already a bird in the hand, if you will. And those who put their buy November, their early purchases out this last winter season and secured the guest, found themselves far ahead of the game. So going forward, what's it going to take to get the guest off the sidelines next year? Who's going to put the best offers out earliest? Are we going to be able to engage the guest in such a way that they'll make a purchasing decision until the snow card is played in the early part of the season? Once again, no good answer, at least not at this stage of the game. So here's a further the better scenario, and I'll just briefly say, over the last couple of years when the economic headwinds were disadvantageous, in other words, it made people feel more like staying close to home, there was good local snow in most of the country. So they didn't have to travel far to get good skiing, and the market shifted to local and regional emphasis. We saw it in virtually every category, and the resorts that were most friendly with their local and regional markets did relatively the best. What happened this last year is just the converse. The discretionary skier who really sustained us over the last couple of years, that really likes the natural stuff and lust for the face shots, had discretion and they used it. It was the destination guest who had booked ahead that really sustained us through the equation. So the flip-flopped, and the destinations who were most steeped in national and international business and had sustained themselves over the last couple of years did relatively the best. Those resorts with local and regional focus were most challenged. If you thought of yourself, or the consumer thinks of you as a day area, then you probably had the kind of lift ticket challenges. If you thought of yourself, or the consumer thinks of you as a destination, you're probably relatively stable. And many of our resorts communities have long since moved from ski areas to ski resorts, to destination winter resorts, to destination year-round resorts, implying that it's not just the lift ticket, although it still is the big granddaddy of destination magnets who attracts our guests. But the more diverse we are, the more attractions that we have to use, the more alternatives there are for guests who come, the less dependent we are on any one. And that's a lesson that's, again, being learned as part of this winter season. Right then, so I don't know if it's a paradox of proximity or a sort of dilemma of the discretionary guest in this process. I'll continue to work on the right phraseology and ask you to humor me as we find the right way to spin this. This is the slide that I've used the last couple of years to describe why lift tickets continue to be so good with good snow. Strength at the core. The person who says not what I do, but who I am when they're asked about skiing, right? The person who has more money from their ski rack up than for their ski rack down in their vehicle. They are the ones who stuck with us when they didn't have discretionary choices and they chose us over other things. And they were the winners of the day. But this year, it's the destination and the destination guest that gets the prize for being sustainable. And of course, if you were trying to build a perfect mix, you'd have some of each, wouldn't you? As is always the case in almost every situation. But the destination guests certainly survived and helped us do so in the past. So we can't really count on demand from the marketplace. We can't really count on the weather. The consumer's confidence is not going to go up enough that the rising tide will float all of our ships together in process. And this information conspired to cause me to really say it's up to you to either drive your own demand or work with those who could. And that set the stage for the theme of last week's Mountain Travel Symposium, which was called Driving the Business of Mountain Travel. I used a presentation similar to this for those of you who are in the audience, sorry, to set the stage for the symposium, and then with 1,047 folks representing the North American travel industry, we spent a week's time trying to figure out what to do about it. The first 2 days of the symposium are buyers, tour operators and travel agents who come to buy vacation product from us. The last day are ski clubs and meeting planners who come to buy from us, from these suppliers. The 2 center days are the forum where we look back, try to figure out what the hell has gone on, and turn around and set the stage going forward. Perhaps not unlike you, this is the end of a season where many of us are probably on a fiscal year and trying to think about what our next year plan is. So the situation assessment, I hope, is helpful to you as you think about what your situation is, the things you control, the things you can't. I'll quickly go on through a couple more items here about how the symposium put itself together. All about supply and demand, and the symposium audience are all on the supply side. We use an attraction, a magnet, a destination magnet to attract the guest further from home than they might otherwise travel, and when they do, they need lodging. And when they do, oftentimes they need transportation. That makes the pieces of a vacation, but somebody's got to put it together and bundle it and package it and send it off to the marketplace. If we continue to do the same as we always have, we would continue to bundle and package our supply just as we always have, based on the supply that's inherently been on our resort. But if we were reinventing ourselves, if we were starting from afresh, if we're taking out a new piece of paper, we might build the supply based on what the marketplace wanted. What a novel idea, right? Instead of having the supply and finding somebody in the marketplace who wants it, what if you could build the supply that corresponds with the demand? Yeah, well, how about that? It means that you have to understand that demand and the different segments of that demand that represent the consumer. I think it's maybe not just serendipity, but actually premeditation that has your presentation today with a supply side person, and what I think is an advocate of the demand side, the consumer side. In our next presentation, talks a little bit about consumers in the consumer segment, as I understand, and what they're looking for and wanting, and how you more likely attract them in the marketplace. But if that's the supply side, here comes the demand side. Customers, their agents, a lot of different ways to buy traditionally, a lot of different ways to buy in the new age, and the rhetorical question, how you put supply and demand together in a way that gives you a competitive advantage over others. If you're going to do it yourself, you have to figure this out, just like destination tourism infrastructure. I find myself in many town council meetings arguing for a $50,000 tourism budget, while somebody comes in looking for $500,000 for a sewer. And not always being successful in promoting the tourism side of an expenditure against the sort of municipal infrastructure side. But I suggest that tourism infrastructure is intangible, but perhaps even more important. So how do you put supply and demand together, or how do you get others to help you? We spent a couple of days talking about tour operators, wholesalers, both traditional and in the new age, the benefit they bring in helping you aggregate your supply and find consumers, and the cost that is incurred when they get a price low enough from you that they can make it attractive to the guest, and when they charge a fee that is great enough that they can do their work, making it perhaps unfeasible for you. There's a lot of arguments and discussions going on in litigation about the taxes they pay to the local community, making this both a blessing and a curse when you use those intermediaries. Other channels, marketing channels, Groupon and Living Social were the two examples used at the symposium. Not really distribution channels, but folks who take it upon themselves to get your supply at such a rate that they can put it out in the marketplace and offer you a guest that you might not otherwise get. But if they want half off for the guest and half of that for their fee, what does that leave you? And if you're a condominium or a property manager who has an obligation to pay 2/3 of that, how does this business model really work? I'm full of rhetorical questions, aren't I? I'm supposed to be the answer guy. I'll leave you with more questions than answers. But this is a channel that holds promise, but it holds challenges just like the tour operator channel does. All right? Leaving us with what's often called brand.com, right? Brand is your brand. Your property's brand, your destination's brand. In the business side of travel, it's Hilton, Hyatt, Hertz, United Airlines, the business travel response to that brand, the frequent flyer miles that go along with that, and perhaps the properties who aggregated themselves under the standards of Hilton or Hyatt, for example. In the leisure travel industry, it's the destination that's the brand, right? That's what the guest responds to. And the DMO and the way the community organizes itself is under the destination brand. That's what you have in common. That's the brand you're trying to support and the brand you're trying to promote out there. So brand.com is TahoeSouth.com or Tahoe North or Mammoth or Aspen. And how you would work together to choose to develop this brand and do it yourself as opposed to those other channels. Once again, pick the channel of your choice, do it yourself, but as we go through the choices, trying to inform our audience, I offer that same sort of thought in a little snippet. We had 47 hours of programming at the symposium. I'm down to 4 minutes left here, so humor me a little bit as we go through this distribution channel drill. But the things that came out of the tools that all of those guys are using are these. Search. The first way that a consumer would go about shopping, what they used to do is they used to go to the Chamber of Commerce or the Resort Association where they could get a list of properties, perhaps a visitor's guide, and go through the process. Nobody does that anymore, right? They go to search. They Google Tahoe, presumably Tahoe South now. one advantage to putting Tahoe first and South second, I think, in that process. So how does that change the job? How does that change what you guys do as a value proposition for your constituents, if that used to be a reason for them to join and it no longer is? We're all faced with creating value for our customers that is greater than the charge that's involved. You as suppliers, us as intermediaries. Social, this idea that social commerce is going to be the new epiphany. Well, those of us who have been around for a while have probably seen the answer to our surveys. How did you hear about us, right? Friends and family. It's always been there forever. It's really the same thing. It's just with a megaphone now, you know, because the internet, any network, geometrically expands communication in a network. I was doing a speech like this at Denver University with a graduate group, and there were 2 people in the audience who asked questions that made me conclude that Groupon, as far as they were concerned, Groupon invented coupons. I went back to Sears and Roebuck in like 1879. But this is a new age of people who hadn't been through kind of, you know, the traditional marketing, and it's like a new epiphany, you know. People use social dialogue to decide where to go on vacations. This is super cool. Well, maybe not so much. But there are blessings and curses with this social channel, because apparently you can't sell through it without betraying the confidence it used to get the social relationship in the first place. So I'm an ROI guy. If you can't sell through the channel, what the hell good is it? Right? We haven't reconciled that difference yet, but apparently we're going to have to, because it's huge. Mobile. We're being told that within the next 2 years, 50% of all leisure travel commerce conducted within 48 hours will be through a mobile device. Is that true in destination travel? Maybe not so much. But I ride a motorcycle. That's one of the reasons that I know Carl, and I often get on my motorcycle and head off with my smartphone, right? Get until it's about time to stop, and then put my geolocator out there and find a lodging property that's available to me, and pick it up within 5 or 10 miles. We're spot in low season anyway. And more people, I suspect, are leaving the Bay Area, coming in this direction, doing very much the same thing. Every one of those channels said you cannot ignore mobile, and do not delegate it to the lower echelons of your organization. These are things that the owners and the investors in every organization have to understand and keep their fingers on. Final flash sales. We talked about that in the context of Groupon and Living Social. Apparently too big to ignore, but tough to figure out how to use in our marketplace. So maybe more questions than answers. And the final presentation at the symposium was Allison Levine, very interesting woman, mountain climber extraordinaire and the like, and she says, basically in her 60-minute speech, no matter how well you plan, things don't go like you think, and when they don't, complacency is the killer. Leadership is defined by what happens at the top of the organization when things don't go as you expect. And more, back to my improv theme here, things don't go as you expect. So what next? And how do you go forward with it? Primary research, I'm going to quickly take you through some of the research that shows you how this winter season looks and how the summer season is going forward. Before I do that, I'm going to show you that we've been working on the bottom part of the organization. Now we're going to work through the top. MTREP creates data by asking properties to submit their confidential information about how many rooms they have, how many are filled, and their rate. We bundle that together and aggregate it. When we have enough properties that represent a destination, then we have a statistically valid destination. When we have enough destinations to represent a region, we glue together the industry. So first a destination view, then the comparison of a destination against others in their region, then an overall industry view is the way that we kind of aggregate our data. Turns out that an advanced reservation is the best forward-looking indicator about what a guest is going to be doing in a way that you have an opportunity to proact. So that's the metric that we use. We now have a hub in Tahoe South. The participants get the results of that data individually, and we've got our first report out now as of the end of February, with March and then April coming originally. But we tell them that we'll share that data only with the participants. So those of you who are lodging properties here, if you aren't already participating, please come see me after. We do have a relatively good data set already, but I figured out how to show you some data without showing you that data. And what I've done in the process is take all of our destinations that you see up here and created a far west region. The The far west region is Mount Bachelor, Mammoth, North Lake Tahoe, and now South Lake Tahoe, the major destinations that are M-Trip participants that are here in this part of the world. So I'm going to show you the Tahoe region so you can see a little bit about how M-Trip works, and then I'll close my comments and get the heck on with the show. Right. This is the far west regional segment. These are the participants in the LTVA sponsored group now. You can see that I've dropped off the bottom with Zephyr Cove. This is not a list that represents the majority of the lodging properties. More is always better statistically, but it does turn out to be a reasonably representative list of the property type categories that we've got. So I'm not embarrassed. In fact, I'm gratified that we've got as good a start as we do here. Nonetheless, this is my shameless promotion for better support on your behalf. This is a self-help deal, and I will say this now and again a little later. LTVA pays the fee. The lodging properties only need to submit the data confidentially to us, and then they get the benefit of the resulting reports back. And they get entered into a drawing for a free cake every Christmas. Courtesy of M-Trip. The motivator that I'm sure will turn the tide in the process. So now, click the Far West Regional segment, or how about that little report? Let's see if it does it. Drum roll. Yep, all right, so Far West Regional segment. We're looking back, so this is actuals, November, this is as of the end of March. So it's actuals through March, then it's reservations on the books as of March 31st through April. Our winter is November through April. Our non-winter is May through October. I'll show you a forward-looking view of non-winter, summer if you will, in a moment's time. But first let's go take a look at occupancy rate and RevPAR winter Far Western region. I think I can do this all. Right, so here's the chart. November through April. Dark blue is the previous year, excuse me, dark blue is the current year, the light hash is the previous year, the red line is year-over-year comparisons. This shows we're at March. And this is amplified so that you can see how it plays with the total over here. So, not surprisingly, I think you would agree, the season started out swimmingly with a lot of momentum here just like it did elsewhere. But absent the kind of weather that destination guests expected, momentum dropped, and so did occupancy through January and into February, where it started to pick back up again. Now this is this year over last year. Last year was a pretty good year all told. So when you are showing increases year over year, you're really showing a really strong rebound, relatively speaking. Nonetheless, based on a March 31 view, and obviously we aren't done with April quite yet, but we're estimating that occupancy will end up being down 6% in that far west region. The next question, of course, is how did Tahoe South do specific to that region, and what can we learn from that process? Play that forward a little later down the road. So here's the rate side. The rate side was off just a little and eventually succumbed. Occupancy always drops first and rate follows. Occupancy always returns first and rate follows, right? Occupancy is the quantity of demand, rate is the quality of demand. Occupancy always drives us in, occupancy always picks us back out. If you get pricing power, occupancy is coming, then you can begin to put price to it. But occupancy always leads, and that's exactly what happened here. So we lost occupancy right when it was hurting us the most, before we could put price back in, when there was a good product involved. This is entirely intuitive and logical, as I would expect. But at the end of the day, it looks like rate's going to be down 6. So when you put them both together, the combination is January, where we didn't have demand and we weren't recovering with rate yet, was the most impacted by that combination. Combination down 13 is probably a pretty valid indicator of how rate's going to look in this overall region, and a little bit about how a municipal planner that uses lodging tax, TOT, you probably hear, I think, and then projects sales tax from it, might begin to use this data to see what's going to be happening down the future. Right, so this is change in occupancy year over year versus change in rate in the green year over year. You can see that occupancy dropped, then rate followed, occupancy returned, then rate followed for a year over year total. This is a little yield manager's total. Now I'm going to roll forward to summer. This is end of February data. Now, looking 6 months in the future based on advanced reservations. Summer doesn't usually book as far in advance as winter does. So the data is really quite thin. But I still want to give you a little look about what we're doing when we look 6 months into the future, which is how far M-Trip can see about this western region summer. And we see mixed results, but overall,
relatively flat in occupancy against last year, and you can make your own decisions about how you liked last year. This year against last year, with the polka dot being where you ended up. So month over month, we're going to watch the fill to see how we're doing versus where we ended up last year, and presumably make adjustments along the process. Here's rate, and we're seeing a lot of rate power in the early part of the season. There's confidence being shown in pricing, and there is no resistance being seen that we can see in these graphs, based on the marketplace right now as we look forward into summer. So encouraging news about summer forthcoming, to the extent that we can see, with this caution of preliminary data, and very much anticipation for what our end of April report will be. Since we look 6 months back, we'll see the whole winter season, November through April. Since we look 6 months forward, we'll see in anticipation the whole summer season forthcoming, May through October. Right, so the total revenues would look at 8% up in the process. This is the combination of occupancy over rate. There's not much to be seen here that is telling. And I think what I'm going to do is stop here rather than go to my closing promotional spiel and all of the yada, 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 which I've already managed to fit in. It was my anticipation that this would be sort of town hall meeting. Usually when I engage with a resort like we have with Tahoe South now, I come back from time to time or do a webisode, really roll up my sleeves and have a nice town hall-like discussion. Right now I think I'm either at time or over time, but you've been really quite kind to me, so I think I'll quit while I'm ahead. Thank you very much.